After 3 years of marriage to Alpha Calden Ashmore, I learned my true place. I was not his Luna. I was a walking, breathing dedicated asset. Oak Archive Chamber. Thessaly's condition is deteriorating again. The blood bond ritual is required. You know your duty. Get here now. Another message from Calden flashed on my phone. Once, those words would have cut deep. But all I felt was the bitter ache of cold resignation. This lunar cycle alone, I had dragged myself to the treatment room 3 times, offering up my blood and my strength. Each session left me hollow, trembling on the edge of collapse. And Calden, he never cared. Where the hell are you, Zarel? You were 3 minutes late. Thessaly couldn't afford to wait. In 3 years as his wife, he had never once shown me the gentleness or patience he reserved for Thessaly Ashmore. She was Calden's beloved until she chose his brother for the Luna title, only to end up a widow. Payment's been increased to 100,000. Check your account. He still thought I stayed for the money. That I was just another shallow Omega. Zarel Stormy? What the hell were you playing at? You had 20 minutes to report to the healer. A deal was a deal. A deal. Yes, that was what he called our marriage. He had never believed I was worthy of him. If my blood hadn't kept his precious Thessaly alive, he wouldn't have spared me a second glance. 3 years of cold shoulders and distant silences had made that painfully clear. I leaned back against the car seat and closed my eyes. The first time I ever saw Calden Ashmore, it was still so vivid in my mind. I had just arrived in the city, alone, when I was caught up in a chain reaction collision. The accident nearly brought the city to its knees, but Calden had appeared in time to stop the disaster. That day, the heroic Alpha left an indelible mark on my heart, though I never imagined our paths would cross again, until he walked into my hospital room while I was having my wounds barrier. Will you be my wife? Just those words, and my quiet, dormant heart began to race. I had never felt that way about any man in my entire life. So when I said, I do, it slipped out before I could stop myself. Later, I learned the price behind those words. Before our marriage was even registered, I discovered the truth. Calden had chosen me for the value of my rare blood. It kept Thessaly alive. It brought benefit to the pack. This union is for the good of the pack, he had told me coldly before I signed. But your primary role is to be her donor. Whenever Thessaly needs you, you will come. In return, I'll make sure you never want for anything. A warning. But I had been so foolishly in love by then that I actually convinced myself that at least my blood gave me a reason to stay by his side. I thought that one day I could shed the label of tool and become someone meaningful to him. I thought I could make him love me. 3 years later, I had failed. Completely. Calden rarely touched me. Even when we were alone, he kept his distance, never allowing our scents to mingle. At first, I thought it was because of our difference in status that my Omega scent was beneath his Alpha dignity. Later, I learned the truth. He was saving himself for another woman, Thessaly Ashmore. His sister-in-law, and the woman he could never let go. Even the accident that had brought him into my life, the one that made me fall for him at first sight. He had been so frantic in his rescue efforts because Thessaly had been caught up in it. He had never truly seen me. My phone vibrated again. This time, the sender wasn't Calden, an anonymous message. With a photo, my breath caught. Even in sleep, Calden looked like a god carved from shadow and steel. His features were sharp enough to cut, a jawline that could draw blood, lashes dark as midnight, lips that seemed designed for broken alliance and cruelty, though I had never tasted either. His body was a weapon, broad shoulders, coiled strength, even at rest. And there she was, Thessaly. Her head rested on his shoulder, a faint smirk curving her lips even in sleep. the look of a victor. Beside her, Calden looked utterly at ease, as if he had come home, as if this with her was where he truly belonged. The message beneath the photo slid in, like a poisoned blade. I bet you've never had a moment like this. Know your place, energy source. Anger flashed through my eyes. This wasn't the first time I'd received such a taunt. It always arrived like clockwork, after every one of Calden's summons. As if I needed reminding of my place, a passing car swept its headlights across my window, illuminating my reflection in the glass. I froze, staring at the stranger staring back. I was an Omega. Yes, but I had never looked like this, deepening with every lunar cycle. Every time I gave a piece of myself to Thessaly, something inside me withered. Another healer's words echoed in my mind. You can't keep this up, Sorel. Even the strongest bloodline has its limits. This intensity will hollow you out. It will kill you. Death. A warrior never feared death. My father had taught me that, but a warrior died. With purpose, with honor. Was this how I would end? Number. My fingers curled into fists against the steering wheel. I had spent 3 years shrinking myself. 3 years bleeding out for him, for her, for a pack that only valued my veins. I had let them hollow me, piece by piece, convinced that if I just gave enough, endured enough, he might finally see me. But he never had. He never would. And I was done dying for people who didn't care if I lived. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Zarel, you are crossing a line. If you don't show today, I'll make sure this city has no place for you. I stared at the screen, and for the first time in 3 years, I laughed. A hollow, broken sound, but a laugh nonetheless. When would Calden realize what had kept me bound to him all this time? It wasn't his alpha authority. It wasn't that ridiculous contract. It had been hope. Foolish, desperate, bleeding hope. And now, that hope was dead. When I decided to leave, no one, not him, not her, not this entire packhold, stopped me. My fingers tightened around the wheel. I started the engine. Sev. T. The car screeched to a halt outside the hospital. I didn't wait for the driver to open my door. I pushed it open myself and strode toward Thessaly's private suite. I hadn't even raised my hand to knock when the door slammed open. That presence hit me like a physical blow, primal, intoxicating. My wolf cowered instinctively before I could stop her. Calden filled the doorway. Even in his tailored suit, he couldn't hide the predator beneath. When his gaze landed on me, irritation flickered first. Then, as his eyes caught the phone in my hand, that irritation hardened into something far more dangerous. Your phone works. His voice sliced through the air, cold enough to freeze the space between us. Then why the fuck weren't you answering my messages? The pack healers have been waiting. His scent flooded my lungs. Pine. This would be the last time. His hand shot out, fingers closing around my wrist hard enough to bruise. The transfusion. Now, I know. My voice came out smaller than I intended, nearly drowned by the blood roaring in my ears. I steadied myself against the doorframe, every muscle tensing. I was no longer the compliant Omega who endured in silence. Calden's lip curled into a vicious smile. Then what the hell are you still standing here for? Ancient pack legends whispered through my mind stories of lone wolves who tore their own bonds rather than live as slaves. My pulse hammered against my ribs, desperate to break free. I'll go. My voice didn't waver. I'll give her my blood. But first, I want something. He raked a hand through his hair, patience fraying. The money's already in your account. He jutted his chin toward his phone. Check it and go. Not money. My voice was terrifyingly calm. Then what? His alpha command reverberated through the room, rattling glass. "Spit it out!" I met his gaze and didn't flinch. "Sever our bond." The words cut my throat on the way out. I want to divorce Calden Ashmore. The world narrowed to the space between our breaths. Calden's mask of control slipped, just for a heartbeat, but I saw it. His piercing gaze swept over my face, like he could physically trace the origins of my betrayal. The great Alpha, momentarily stunned by the defiance of his weakest wolf. I could practically hear his thoughts. The desperate Omega who'd bartered her rare blood for protection. What gave her the right to make demands now? Explain! His command vibrated through my bones, thick with alpha power. Nothing left to say. I kept my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. I'll give my blood to Thessaly, but this is my price. My fingers curled into my palms, nails biting flesh. I stared at the medical equipment behind him. Anywhere but those golden eyes that saw too much. We had a deal! A growl rumbled deep in his chest, his wolf's amber glow bleeding into his irises, and I am breaking it. I finally met his gaze, my chin lifting. Turn me over to the council. Strip my title. I don't care. For the first time in 3 years, something flickered across his face that wasn't anger or disdain. Something almost like, I wouldn't let myself fall into that trap again. He'd expected the usual my quiet submission, my hunched shoulders and averted eyes. Not this. Never this. A muscle jumped in his jaw as he studied me, his scent turning acrid with conflicted emotion. Fine. The word came out clipped, edged with something that might have been reluctance. Do you have the papers? The question struck like a physical blow. Of course he'd ask about logistics before reasons. Efficiency over emotion. That was Calden Ashmore in essence. Not yet. My voice barely carried. His stare bored into me, as if trying to decipher whether the fractures in my resolve were real or just another manipulation. Then, with the finality of a judge's gavel, Beta Aldrin drafted the divorce documents. The world tilted on its axis. His immediate agreement shouldn't have shocked me. Yet it did. The finality of it stole my breath, leaving the hospital suite eerily hollow. I blinked back treacherous tears, raising my chin as if I had practiced it 1,000,000 times. Beta Aldrin returned too quickly. The divorce papers a death sentence in his hands. Calden signed without hesitation, his signature a brutal slash of ink across the page. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw anything flicker in those golden eyes. But it was gone before I could name it, replaced by that infuriating alpha calm. Deal! He slid the document into an envelope with archive chamberal precision. The council will process this by sundown. Don't delay. My fingers trembled as I tucked my copy away. The paper burning like ice against my skin. 3 years of stolen glances and unspoken wants, reduced to 2 signatures. Thessaly's waiting. He turned on his heel, already moving on. I followed numbly. My pulse a ragged thing in my throat. That is it. I shouldn't have expected anything from him in the first place. The VIP suite reeked of roses and deception. Thessaly lounged like a pampered queen, her silk robe artfully draped to highlight every curve. The elderly healer dozed in the corner, exhausted from tending to her critical condition. Calden, her voice was honeyed poison, eyes lighting up, until they landed on me. A delicate frown, darling, I told you I didn't need. A fake cough, a theatrical sigh. Calden ignored her performance. Zarel's here. Let's get this over with. I stepped forward with unyielding elegance. Thessaly's smirk faltered as I waved my hand, clearing the thick mist of illusion around her. The reality hit everyone immediately. Her energy was perfectly stable, her aura flawless. No fatigue, no weakness. It was just a complete facade. Smell that, Alpha? No blood. Just another lie. My voice cracked with the weight of 1,000 unsaid truths. How many times have you made me bleed for nothing? A deadly silence filled the room as Calden's gaze locked onto the trembling human doctor. The air thickened with the acrid stench of fear, sweat, and deception. Explain. Just one word, but it carried the weight of an Alpha's wrath. Dr. Patel flinched as if struck, his fingers clutching at his lab coat. His eyes darted to Thessaly. A tale as obvious as a bleeding rabbit in wolf territory. Alpha. I only followed orders, he stammered. Calden took a single step forward. The doctor shrunk back, his pulse jumping visibly in his throat. Whose orders? Each syllable dripped with lethal calm. Thessaly's perfume turned cloying as she shifted on the bed. Calden, darling. A sharp gesture silenced her. Even the pack's precious golden girl knew better than to test an Alpha's patience now. The doctor broke like dry kindling. Miss Ashmore said, you wanted the records falsified. Said you needed Luna Zarel summoned? His voice cracked. She threatened my medical license, my family. A beat of stunned silence. Then. And my blood. My voice cut through the tension like silver through flesh. What happened to what you took from me? The doctor's gaze dropped to the floor. Misallocated to other factions. Thessaly's perfect facade shattered. Lies, all of it. Her manicured fingers twisted in the sheets. Calden, you can't possibly. I didn't wait for her performance. With a tap, I sent the damning photo to Calden's phone. The buzz of his device seemed deafening in the charged silence. Your security can trace the sender, I said calmly, though my pulse roared in my ears. But I think it is easy to guess who took that picture. Calden's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. Where did this come from? I met his gaze without flinching. Ask your future, Luna. Thessaly's mask slipped for just a second, a crack in her perfect porcelain facade, before she summoned another wave of calculated vulnerability. Her lashes fluttered like wounded butterflies. I didn't wait for the performance. Our deal is done, I said, turning toward the door. Find yourself a new dedicated asset. Behind me, the doctor scrambled for the exit like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. Then, the dramatic thud of knees hitting linoleum. Calden. I can't. Her manicured hand clutched at his sleeve. It is like when Dalen, the name hit. Like a silver bullet. I felt Calden stiffen before I saw it. The way his shoulders locked, the barely perceptible tremor in his hands. Dalen, his lost brother. A memory about some loyal wolves who never made it home. Thessaly went boneless against him. The picture of fainting maidenhood. The elevator dinged. I stepped inside, counting the agonizing seconds. 1, 2, 3. Silence. No thundering footsteps, no alpha command shaking the walls. Just the hollow echo of my own heartbeat. My lips curled into something too sharp to be a smile. 3 years of bleeding for him, and I didn't even rate a goodbye. It was indeed the right decision to divorce him. The only thing wrong was that I had wasted 3 years to make it. The garage air smelled of gasoline and polished leather. Calden's Bugatti crouched in its designated spot, sleek and untouchable, just like its owner. Then, I saw it, the Rolls-Royce Phantom. Smoke-colored, bearing the crest of the Mazatian pack, my fingers trailed across the hood ornament. A howling wolf wrapped in thorns. The symbol of my true birthright. To this pack, I was Zarel Stormy, the disposable Omega, but the driver bowing before me knew better. Welcome home, Heiress Fymir. The tinted window slid down with a whisper of luxury, revealing the face I hadn't realized I'd missed so desperately. Sirik Famir's dark eyes gleamed with quiet fury and relief. An alpha's welcome, his scent wrapped around me, cedar and wintergreen. So different from Calden's pine, and iron dominance, yet just as powerful. Get in, little wolf. The locks disengaged with a muted click. I tumbled into the leather seats, my body moving on instinct before my mind could catch up. Then, I folded forward, pressing my forehead to my brother's thigh. His hand settled between my shoulder blades, warm and heavy, with the unshakable certainty of home. There. His thumb traced slow circles over my spine, the way he'd done when I'd skinned my knees as a child. Let it out. The rolls purred to life beneath us, its vibration thrumming through my bones. The tears came then. Silent, shuddering things that left dark stains on his briony wool trousers. I was so stupid. I choked out, the words scraping my throat raw. So blind. Sirik didn't offer empty platitudes. Just the steady weight of his palm and a truth that settled like sunlight. We all chase the wrong moon sometimes. I finally sat up, leaving my grief smeared across $10,000 worth of tailoring. My brother's mouth quirked. Feel better. I swiped at my damp cheeks with the back of my hand. Thank you for coming. I hope I didn't. Council meeting? Sirik snorted, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate calm. Let's just say they'll survive the scandal of their alpha walking out mid-vote to retrieve his sister from that backwater pack. The way he said backwater, like Calden's territory was some flea-ridden outpost rather than one of the strongest southern alliances, made something tight in my chest. Finally loosen. Home. The Missatian Empire didn't just rule territories, it owned them. Our holdings stretched across continents like gilded roots, boardrooms in London and Tokyo, answering to the same ancient bloodline that had once ruled from wolfskin thrones. And Sirik Famir, my brother, heir to it all, currently had his briony-clad arm around my shaking shoulders, like I was still the pup who'd followed him through moonlit forests. You texted. His voice carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken worries. The world can wait. His fingers carted through my hair, leaving behind the comforting musk of home vetiver and snowmelt. So different from Sunlight Ridge's pine and iron austerity. The scent alone made my throat tighten. Thank you, I whispered, picking at my sleeve, for the photo trace, for everything. Sirik's thumb brushed away a stray tear, his touch lingering like a brand. Took 3 calls, a wolf's smile, all teeth. The moment you mentioned Thessaly's head trauma, I had enforcers watching every archive chamber in their territory. The admission cracked something open in my chest. 3 years of isolation, and they'd been watching the whole time. Father howls, for you. The words landed like a physical blow. Our Alpha Father's full moon ritual, a lament for missing pack. My eyes burned anew. I was a fool, I choked out, burying my face in his shoulder. You warned me. The whole damn pack warned me. His arms locked around me. Alpha strength tempered by brotherly care. You walked into that fire to prove it wouldn't burn you. That is not foolishness. That is Famir blood. I laughed wetly against his lapel. Turns out fire burns everyone the same. Sirik's growl vibrated through me. Calden Ashmore never deserved our princess. He tipped my chin up, dark eyes scanning the damage, the hollows under my eyes, the scars no one could see. Sunlight Ridge will learn what happens when they play games with Missatian wolves. The roles crossed the territorial boundary, the air shifting subtly as ancient wardstones recognized their lost daughter. Sirik pressed his forehead to mine, our breaths mingling in the sacred space between alphas and their kin. Welcome home, Zerel Famir, Set, Wend, Calden's, Povei. The sterile hospital air clung to my skin like a second layer of clothing, heavy with the acrid tang of antiseptic and Thessaly's rose perfume. I strode from her private ward, my knuckles still throbbing from where I'd punched the observation room wall. Fainted. No crisis, feigned Luna frailty. The head healer's diagnosis echoed in my skull, each word a fresh insult. 3 years. 3 God-stamped years of emergency transfusions, of watching Zarel grow paler with each donation, all for theatrics. My phone burned in my palm. Sorry. The number you've dialed is unavailable. I crushed the device against my ear hard enough to make the plastic creak. When the automated voice repeated its mocking refrain, something primal snarled in my chest. Gone. Not just from the hospital. From the territory, from me. Beta Aldrin materialized at my elbow, his usual confidence frayed at the edges. No sign of her. Alpha security cams show her leaving through the west garage alone. Alone. The word hooked between my ribs. Zarel had never gone anywhere alone. Not since the pact bound her to my pack. Always an escort. Always my oversight. Track her! The command ripped from my throat before I could temper it. Every road, every flight manifest I want. What? The unspoken question hung between us. What did I want from the Omega who'd been nothing but a contractual obligation? We'd never completed the mating bond. She never wore my mark. Our marriage was just on paper. Then why did I want her back? Aldrin hesitated. The council will question diverting resources too, now. My canines punched through my gums, the taste of copper flooding my mouth. As Aldrin scrambled to obey, I braced against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. My reflection stared back, a stranger with wild eyes and a heaving chest. Zarel. Stormy. The name tasted wrong. She'd never been stormy to me. Not really, just. Zarel, the quiet shadow who appeared when summoned, who endured my coldness without complaint, whose rare arch-negative blood had saved Thessaly more times than I could count. And now, she was gone. My wolf raged against its chains as her scent faded from my territory. And her absence carved a hole in my chest. I whirled toward the elevators, my dress shoes striking the polished. Alpha? Aldrin called after me. I didn't slow. Call the enforcers, activate the bloodhound units. On what grounds? The elevator doors slid open. I met his gaze over my shoulder, letting my wolf bleed into my eyes. On the grounds that she took, what is mine? The tires crunched over the estate's gravel drive, each sound making my pulse jump. Through the tinted windows, the ancestral oaks stood like silvered sentinels, their branches swaying in a welcome. I wasn't sure I deserved. Siric's hand settled on mine before I could start chewing my nails. Breathe, little wolf. I stepped out into air so thick with pack magic, it made my teeth hum. 3 years. 3 years since I'd last smelled the crisp mountain sage woven through our territory markers. Heard the wind chime singing from the west garden, where Mother's memorial stood. The double doors yawned open before we reached them. Father stood framed in the doorway, the morning light gilding his broad shoulders. The newspaper crumpled in his grip betrayed his pretense of nonchalance. So, his voice rumbled like distant thunder, my runaway pup finally slinks home. I didn't let him finish. The collision knocked the breath from us both. His arms, those same arms that had swung me onto his shoulders when I was a cub, locked around me with terrifying gentleness. Vanilla and aged whiskey, the scent that had always meant safety, flooded my senses. You didn't even let me deliver my prepared alpha speech, he grumbled into my hair. 12 bullet points about responsibility, historical examples, everything. I laughed wetly against his chest. Recite it now. I'll listen. He held me at arm's length, his callous thumbs wiping tears I hadn't realized were falling. When his gaze dropped to the faint scars circling my inner elbows, something feral flashed in his gold-flecked eyes. Siric's growl harmonized with Father's. The pack bonds thrummed between us. Alive with shared fury, no words needed. They'd seen everything, known everything. Sunlight Ridge won't touch you again. Father's voice carried the weight of centuries, old alpha bloodlines. That Ashmore pup wouldn't survive the conversation if he dared set paw on our territory. I exhaled the last of Calden's hold on me. I am done with him. Father's nostrils flared, testing my resolve. Whatever he found made him nod once before pulling me back into the shelter of his embrace. Welcome home, Princess. Beyond the windows, the pack howls began, first one, then a dozen, then hundreds, a rising tide of voices celebrating the return of a daughter they'd never truly lost. Father held me tight, his alpha scent wrapping around me like armor. The moon goddess didn't make you to be some alpha's footnote, pup. The words rumbled through his chest. You're true, mate will recognize your worth. I leaned into his touch, the last of my tension dissolving. I know. Siric's boots thudded against the hardwood as he sprawled across the sofa arm. Reservation at Lutter and Wegner at 8, private dining room. Father's eyebrow arched, the only warning before his alpha voice dropped like a gavel. Shouldn't you be reviewing the Tokyo acquisition? Delegated. Siric flashed his canines in that reckless grin that always made our accountants weep. Priorities, old man. The corner of Father's mouth twitched. For all his bluster, he'd never been able to resist Siric's charm. Speaking of priorities, Siric continued, nodding toward me, Els agreed to take her seat at the table. Father's gaze sharpened. 3 years ago, he'd been preparing me to oversee our European holdings and omega-breaking traditions in a world of alpha CEOs. The fact that he'd kept the position open, my spine straightened. I am ready to serve the pack. No more chasing phantom love. No more shrinking myself to fit some alpha's narrow expectations. Sunlight Ridge had tried to make me invisible, but here, I was a Famir. Father's approving growl vibrated through the room. That is my blood. He clasped my elbow, steering me toward the grand staircase. Tavion kept your nest ready. Uncle Tavion still remembers my midnight snack raids. I laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in years. Please! Siric rolled his eyes. The man has a spreadsheet of your fruit preferences. Those Japanese grapes cost more than his monthly salary. My childhood bedroom smelled of lavender and pack of safety. Poe the panda sat propped against the pillows, his threadbare arms outstretched as if he'd been waiting. I buried my face in his familiar softness, the last shards of Calden's hold on me crumbling to dust. Father lingered in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the afternoon sun. Rest, pup. We'll howl the roof down tonight. As the door clicked shut, I curled into the downy embrace of my nest. Somewhere beyond the leaded windows, the wind carried the distant chorus of packmates going about their day. The cooks preparing tonight's feast, the sentries changing shifts, the pups tumbling in the gardens. The rhythm of a pack that had never stopped being mine. Tend. Alpha, Merrick's Po V. The door clicked shut behind me with the finality of a vault ceiling. After 3 years, my daughter was finally home, downstairs. My son Siric waited like a shadow at the foot of the grand staircase. My heir in every way that mattered. I settled into my study chair, the ancient leather creaking under my weight. The light sliced through the window blinds, painting tiger stripes across the dossier in Siric's hands. Show me. No pleasantries, no preamble. Just the command of an alpha who'd waited 3 years for this reckoning. No one could leave unharmed after using my baby girl. Siric's smile was a blade unsheathed. The glow from his tablet painted eerie shadows across the sharp planes of his face as he tapped the screen. Thessaly Ashmore, he murmured, the name dripping with disdain. Born Thessaly Voss, former mate to Calden, until she traded up for his older brother Dalen. I leaned forward, the leather of my chair groaning in protest. Smart move, Cyric continued, swiping to a coronation announcement. Dalen was Sunlight Ridge's heir apparent until a tap brought up a grainy battle report, that convenient border skirmish 3 years ago. My defensive stance punched through the armrests. You are suggesting that grieving widow just happened to return to her childhood sweetheart before the blood dried. Cyric's golden eyes glinted. And then our girl has been bled dry to keep that viper alive. The air thickened with the scent of burning cedar, my wolf rising to the surface. 3 years. 3 years I'd allowed this farce to continue for Zarel's sake. No more. Dig deeper, I growled. I want every skeleton in that she-wolf's closet. Every whisper about that accidental death. Cyric's fangs gleamed in the dim light. Already on it. Good. Let's peel back Thessaly's lies layer by layer. I stood, my shadow swallowing the moonlit wall behind me. There is another important thing. We're hosting a banquet. Make it worthy of our bloodline and Zarel's homecoming. My heir didn't need notes. I saw the calculations flashing behind his dark eyes. Caterers, security, the delicate balance of politics and power. Guest list parameters. A slow smile pulled at my lips. Every alpha worth their fangs. I let my defensive stance extend just enough to score the armrest and ensure those Ashmore pups receive their invitations personally. The emphasis wasn't subtle. This wasn't just a celebration. It was a hunt dressed in silk and champagne. Let the entire werewolf aristocracy see my daughter radiant in Missation jewels. Let Calden watch as the Omega he'd treated as disposable reclaimed her birthright. Understood, father. Cyric bowed slightly before turning to leave. I'll ensure the invitations reach everyone who should be there. 3 years ago, Zarel Stormy had been nothing more than a transaction. A nameless Omega with Rh-negative blood rarer than moon-touched silver. The council saw its value, and I'd cared only about the archive chamberal details, her blood compatibility with Thessaly, her lack of pack ties, the convenience of her desperation. She wanted marriage. I needed her veins. It should have been a fair exchange. Then, why? Does her absence feel like an open wound? I drained my whiskey, the burn doing nothing to settle my wolf. The initial report from my enforcer glared up at me from the desk. 3 pages of nothing. No travel records. No credit card activity. No trace of an Omega who'd lived in my territory for years. Like smoke. Like she'd never existed. I clenched around the crystal tumbler. That wasn't possible. Every wolf left traces, scent markers. Financial breadcrumbs. Something. Unless she knew how to disappear. Who was this woman who could vanish from a secured alpha's estate without triggering a single alarm? Who'd endured 3 years of being treated as less than a Luna without ever fighting for more? My wolf snarled at the emptiness in my den. The closet where her few simple dresses had hung stood barren. The bathroom lacked her vanilla and Rain's scent. Even the kitchen, where she'd sometimes left herbal tea steeping for me after late council meetings, carried only the stale odor of disuse. Alpha! Aldrin hovered in the doorway, tablet in hand. The archive chamber footage shows her entering a black Rolls Royce with tinted windows. No license plate visible. My spine went rigid. A Rolls! Custom Phantom. By the looks of it, $250,000 at minimum. Impossible. Zarel owned nothing but the clothes he'd provided. She'd arrived at Sunlight Ridge with a single duffel bag, and I caught my breath. Had she ever truly been penniless? Memories surfaced like shards of broken glass, the way she'd hesitated before signing contracts. The too perfect penmanship for someone claiming to be uneducated. the quiet confidence when speaking to my business associates that had always struck me as unnatural for an Omega of no standing. Aldrin cleared his throat. There is more. The car turned northeast at the highway junction, northeast, toward Misation territory. I shattered the glass against the wall, staring at the amber liquor dripping down the wall like blood. Run a deep background check, I growled, vibrating with alpha power. Not just blood type this time. I want to know who the hell Zarel Stormy really is, no matter what you had hidden from me. Zarel, I dig it out. Hi. Wet. Went. Zarel's. Po Feeve. The growl of a Maseratis engine shattered the estate's tranquility. I knew that sounded like my own heartbeat. Elsa Sterling had arrived in her signature silver Meek 20, the one she'd christened Moonchaser after our wild midnight escapade at 17. She emerged in a whirlwind of designer silk and alpha-born confidence, her emerald eyes locking onto me before her stilettos even touched stone. Zarel Famir. Her shriek could have woken the dead. Then she was crushing me in a hug that smelled of Chanel No. 5 and home. 3 years. 3 damn years playing Cinderella for that backwater pack. I buried my face in her rose gold hair, the familiar citrus and cinnamon scent unraveling knots in my chest. I hadn't known were there. Elsa held me at arm's length, her manicured nails digging into my shoulders. Look at you, she breathed, taking in my hollowed cheeks. My God, what did those rivals do to you? I opened my mouth. Number. She dragged me toward the house. First tea, then war plans. In my bedroom. Elsa prowled while I sipped jasmine tea from my grandmother's bone china. Darling, she plucked at my sleeve. We need to talk about your wardrobe situation. You've been through hell, and that is exactly why you need to look absolutely stunning. The best revenge is living well and looking even better. I laughed, a sound that surprised me with its lightness. You haven't changed at all, have you? Please. She flopped onto the bed, sending Poe the panda tumbling. You are Misation royalty. You'll wear couture and watch that ruthless adversary's Ashmore choke on his own tongue. The mention of him made my teacup rattle. Speaking of that, my expression grew serious. I do need to go back. I need to retrieve the divorce decree and officially complete the proceedings. Elsa's jaw tightened. That bastard Calden and his family put you through enough. Are you sure you want to face them again so soon? I need to do this, Elsa. I need closure, and I need to reclaim what is mine. Will you come with me? Without hesitation, Elsa reached over and squeezed my hand. Try and stop me. We'll show them exactly what they lost. Wentinuous. The iron gates of Sunlight Ridge loomed before us, their ornate scrollwork suddenly laughable compared to the ancient stone arches of my homeland. Elsa's Maserati purred to a stop, the engine's growl scattering a group of lounging enforcers like startled jackals. I stepped out into air thick, with the scent of pine and pettiness. Well, well. A familiar sneer cut through the murmurs. Garrett Calden's least intelligent enforcer swaggered forward, his boots kicking up gravel. If it isn't our runaway energy source. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Grace, the beta female who'd always resented my presence, twirled a lock of hair around her finger. Did you rent that car by the hour, sweetheart? Or is your new alpha paying for? The crack of Elsa's car door silenced them. Every head turned as she emerged in a cloud of vanilla and venom, her Valentino stilettos sinking into Sunlight Ridge dirt like daggers. The sterling ruby gleamed at her throat, a declaration of power no werewolf could mistake. Garrett's smirk died when his wolf recognized hers. A dominant, apologize. My voice surprised even me, cold and clear as winter runoff. To my sister now. Grace's nose wrinkled. Sister. Since when does a mere wanderer have? Before she could finish, Elsa moved with absolute blinding speed. The air grew freezing cold as Elsa stepped into her space, her shadow looming over Grace like an inescapable storm, completely cutting off her words. "This," Elsa purred, "is Alpha Sterling's heir you are speaking to," and that, her other hand gestured to me with deadly grace, "is my dear friend, your former Luna." The pack's collective inhale was almost comical. The guard's face turned ashen, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. Everyone knew the Sterlings didn't make threats, they made examples. Elsa's smile could have frosted hell. "Apologize now." Her manicured finger tapped her chin. "Or shall I call Daddy and tell him Sunlight Ridge needs reminding about manners?" But, before the confrontation could escalate further, another voice cut through the tension. "What is going on here?" Former Luna Amara descended the packhouse steps, her designer wrap fluttering despite the absence of wind. The scent of her bergamot perfume clashed violently with the aggression in the air. Her cold gaze swept over me, her lip curling, back like a bad penny Stormy. The way she spat my former name made it sound like an insult. "Come to pester my son again. Haven't you caused enough trouble for this family?" My defensive stance unsheathed with an audible snick. 3 years. 3 years of my veins being tapped like a keg for her son's precious Thessaly. And this hag dared to call me pestering her son. I caused her family trouble? I dragged on deep breaths to stop myself from lashing out. No need to waste time with them. I was here just to get my things and leave. "I just want my belongings," I ground out. "Then I'll gladly never smell this wretched place again." Amara's laugh was the sound of ice cracking. "You think you can waltz into my son's private chambers? You are nothing but a discarded. Save your groundless arrogance for someone who actually fears your empty titles." Elsa's voice rang out like a gunshot. Every pack member within earshot froze. "Before you call anyone an adversary, maybe take a look in the mirror at that face even your alpha son can't stand to look at." I had to admit, pride swelled in my chest. Elsa Sterling for a reason. The color drained from Amara's face, her perfectly Botoxed forehead actually wrinkling in rage. "How dare you talk to me in that manner? Do you know who I am? Do you think I really care?" Elsa took a predatory step forward, her sterling ruby flashing like a warning beacon. "Respect is earned, you bitter crone, and you are not worthy of even my boot polish." Amara's face turned an alarming shade of purple, her ears practically steaming with rage. "Guards!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Remove these uninvited disruptors immediately!" Amara's shriek could have shattered glass. But no guards dared to move. Her scream turned more sharply. "Beta Aldrin, get out of here now!" The beta emerged like a soldier stepping onto a battlefield, his sharp eyes taking in the scene. Elsa's bared teeth, my clenched fists, Amara's trembling rage. "Former Luna," Aldrin said to Amara with a light bow. "How may I serve?" Amara jabbed a manicured finger at us. "Remove these intruders." That disgrace her gaze sliced to me, forfeited all rights to this territory. And her little friend just insulted a Luna. Aldrin's jaw tightened as he recognized Elsa. Every beta worth their salt knew the Sterling heiress, and the war that would follow if harm came to her. "With respect," he said, voice steel wrapped in silk. "Denying Miss Sterling diplomatic courtesy would violate 3 separate interpack treaties." His gaze flicked to the enforcers edging closer. "Unless we want lightning pack warriors at our borders by sundown?" Amara's face purpled. "You'd choose some Omega's whore over your own. I am preventing an interpack war," Aldrin cut in, his voice steel-edged. "Unless you'd prefer to explain to Alpha Calden why we're at odds with the lightning pack." The moment Calden's name was invoked, Amara's bluster deflated like a punctured balloon. "Thursday. There is no need to bother him," she stammered, her bravado crumbling. He is occupied with more important matters than this trash. I exhaled quietly. Though I wasn't afraid to face Calden again, I had no desire for unnecessary complications. Amara finally relented, stepping aside with all the grace of a cornered alley cat. But the venom in her glare promised, "This wasn't over. I'll be watching your every step, Stormy." She hissed my discarded name like a curse. I scoffed and continued climbing the stone steps, my heels clicking against the weathered granite. Then, a sharp pressure against my lower back. Amara. The former Luna had slithered behind me, her fingers digging into my waist. But the broken woman who'd fled sunlight, Ridge weeks ago, no longer existed. My enhanced reflexes ignited. In one fluid motion, I pivoted, slamming my forearm against hers with enough force to send her designer-clad body reeling backward. The result was immediate. Amara's expensive heels caught on the uneven stone. For one glorious second, she windmilled her arms like an overturned beetle, then crashed down 5 steps in a tangle of silk skirts and snarled hair. A gasp rippled through the gathered pack members. Someone stifled a laugh. "You little adversary!" Amara shrieked from the ground. "You dare lay hands on me, you worthless Omega!" I gazed down at her with the detached coldness of an alpha assessing prey. "I defended myself against an attack, former Luna. Perhaps you should be more careful where you place your hands." Aldrin rushed to help her up, and I caught the flicker in his eyes. He had seen everything. Good. That meant I had no more need to waste my breath. Thou end. The Alpha's office smelled of Calden's cedar cologne and stale power plays. My fingers didn't tremble as I took the divorce papers, just another contract to sever, like all the others I'd negotiated for my family's empire. The embossed stamps glittered in the lamplight, each one a key to my freedom. Perfect! The word tasted like victory. Now, about my belongings, burn them all. Are you certain? Aldrin's brow furrowed. There might be items of sentimental value. Nothing in this den holds value for me. I cut him off. Let the flames purify what his touch corrupted. As we turned to leave, the beta hesitated. Your acquaintance with Miss Sterling. Unexpected for someone in your former position. I didn't blink. True bonds transcend borders. Beta. Elsa's sudden turn was perfectly executed. Her velvet gown swept across the marble floor as she stepped down, her stiletto pinning Amara's silk shawl firmly to the ground, trapping her hand beneath the heavy fabric in a display of absolute dominance. "Oh dear!" Elsa's honeyed tone dripped with false concern. "How clumsy of me!" Amara's whimpers followed us down the hall. "This isn't over," she hissed, yet her final threat was as hollow as my marriage with Calden had been. It was over. I was certain. Calden's Pove vase. The mind link hit me like a physical blow, interrupting my afternoon meeting with the pack's financial advisors. Aldrin's mental voice was tense as he spoke. "Alpha, we have a situation. Zarel has returned to the territory with Elsa Sterling from the Lightning Pack. There has been an incident with your mother." My coffee cup shattered in my grip at once. My heart was racing, though I couldn't tell if it was from panic or something else entirely. "Meeting adjourned," I barked, already moving toward the door. As I walked through the corridors, I told myself my urgency was purely practical. Thessaly needed to maintain her position as my mate, and any disruption had to be addressed. It had nothing to do with the way my wolf perked up at Zarel's name, or how my pulse quickened at the thought of seeing her again. When I arrived at the pack house, I found my mother in the hallway, tears streaming down her face as she cradled her hand. "Mother, what happened?" I knelt beside her. "That monster!" she sobbed, pointing toward the exit. "She attacked me, Calden. That vicious Omega pushed me down the stairs, and then her friend deliberately stepped on my hand. They humiliated me in front of the entire pack." "She pushed you down the stairs." I asked, my brow pulling together in confusion. Maliciously, without provocation, Mother's voice rose. She is nothing but an ill-mannered Omega who has forgotten her place. And that friend of hers, how does a nobody like Zarel know someone from the Lightning Pack? There is something suspicious about this. Before I could respond, Aldrin's voice echoed in my mind again. Alpha, I need to clarify what actually happened. Your mother attempted to push Zarel down the stairs. Zarel defended herself, and your mother lost her balance. Miss Sterling's action appeared intentional, but it was in response to your mother's aggression. The revelation hit me like a blow. My mother had tried to harm Zarel. Mother! My voice was dangerously quiet. Is there something you want to tell me about your interactions with Zarel during our union? Guilt flashed across her features before being replaced by indignation. I was merely enforcing the traditional protocols required of our station. The strict restrictions and constant supervision were necessary. She lacked the formal discipline required to lead under our name, and too independent. Strict discipline. My voice dropped to a whisper. You beat my mate. Your ex-mate, she corrected quickly. It is Luna's duty to maintain order among the pack women. I stared at my mother as if seeing her for the first time. How many times had Zarel come to me with bruises she claimed were from training accidents? The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture that made my wolf howl with rage and something unknown. You will never lay a hand on another pack member again, I said, my alpha command bleeding into my voice. Is that understood? But even as I addressed Mother's behavior, another part of my mind focused on Aldrin's information. Zarel's friendship with Elsa Sterling was more than curious. How did a supposed Omega from an unknown pack become friends with the princess of one of the most powerful families in the region? And despite everything, despite the divorce, despite my commitment to Thessaly, I found myself consumed by one overwhelming need. I had to find Zarel. I had to at least make her apologize for the disrespect shown to my mother, regardless of the circumstances. It was a matter of pack honor, of my authority as Alpha. At least, that is what I told myself as I prepared to track her down. The steady hum of Elsa's car engine filled the comfortable silence between us as we drove away from the Sunlight Ridge Pack house. I could sense her tension radiating through our confined space, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel with unusual force. I can't believe that damned woman's audacity. Elsa finally burst out, her voice harsh and menacing. Even Beta Aldrin recognized me, yet that woman had the nerve to humiliate you right in front of me. Honestly, I think she uses her brain exclusively for selecting those hideous luxury items she is always flaunting around the pack house. Her fierce loyalty warmed something deep in my chest that had been cold for far too long. I'd grown so accustomed to being treated as less than nothing that having someone defend me felt almost surreal. The memory of Amara's cruel words still stung, but Elsa's righteous anger on my behalf made them seem less important somehow. Elsa, I am so sorry you had to witness that, I said softly, turning to study her profile as she steered the winding roads leading away from the pack territory. But I want you to know that I meant what I said back there. I am not going back, not ever. The declaration felt powerful on my tongue, like speaking it aloud made it more real, more permanent. For 3 years, I'd endured Amara's cruelty, telling myself it was temporary, that things would improve eventually. But seeing myself through Elsa's eyes had shown me just how far I'd fallen, how much of myself I'd lost in that toxic environment. Good, Elsa said firmly, finally relaxing her death grip on the steering wheel. You deserve so much better than that treatment, which reminds me, we need to get you properly dressed for the banquet. You are going to walk into that event looking absolutely stunning, and everyone will remember exactly who Zarel truly is. The prospect of shopping should have filled me with anxiety. Money back at the Sunlight Ridge Pack hadn't always been tight, but each time, Amara made it clear that any expenses on my behalf were burdensome and unwelcome, even though I was her son's lover's dedicated asset. Now with Elsa, Everything felt different. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself actually looking forward to the experience. The boutique Elsa chose was elegant, but not intimidating, with soft lighting and carefully curated displays that made everything look like art. The sales associates treated us with genuine warmth, and I realized with a start that this was how normal people experienced shopping. Without judgment, without having to justify every purchase or endure pointed comments about wasting money. "Try this one," Elsa said, holding up a deep blue dress that seemed to shimmer under the boutique's lights. "It'll bring out your eyes perfectly." As I slipped into the dressing room and pulled the dress over my head, I caught sight of myself in the full-length mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. The rich fabric hugged my curves in all the right places, and the color did indeed make my eyes appear more vibrant than they had in years. "Zarel, you look absolutely radiant," Elsa breathed when I emerged from the dressing room. "That dress was made for you." Her genuine admiration made me blush. When had I last received a compliment that wasn't backhanded or conditional? The realization hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't remember the last time someone had praised me without expecting something in return. We spent the next 2 hours trying on various outfits, and Elsa insisted on purchasing several pieces despite my protests. Each time I caught my reflection in the mirror, I looked more like the person I used to be. The person I'd almost forgotten existed beneath layers of self-doubt and diminished expectations. "You are glowing," Elsa observed as we loaded our purchases into her car. I smiled at her, and we finally got in the car. As we drove back to my sanctuary, I reflected on how much joy I'd missed over the past 3 years. Amara's rules had been suffocating, not leaving the pack house after 9 p.m., endless chores that kept me isolated and exhausted, constant criticism that chipped away at my self-worth piece by piece. I'd become a shadow of myself, and it had happened so gradually that I hadn't even noticed until now. "Would you consider staying over tonight?" I asked Elsa as we pulled into the driveway. "I am not ready for this day to end, and I could use the company." "Of course," she replied without hesitation. "We could have a proper girls' night. It has been far too long since we've had the chance to just talk and relax." My heart swelled with gratitude. Having a friend who genuinely wanted to spend time with me felt like a precious gift I'd never thought I'd receive again. We were just settling in with cups of tea when the front door opened, and Sirik's familiar voice called out, "Zarel, I brought you some things I thought you might need." I hurried to greet him, finding him laden with shopping bags and wearing his gentle smile. Did I mention that Sirik had always been the most thoughtful of my 3 brothers? He was the one who remembered birthdays and noticed when someone was struggling. "You didn't have to do this," I protested, even as warmth spread through my chest at his gesture. "Of course I did," he replied simply, setting the bags down and pulling me into a brief hug. Elsa appeared in the doorway behind me, and I noticed the way her entire demeanor shifted when she saw Sirik. Her previously relaxed posture became rigid, and her smile turned forced. "Elsa." Sirik greeted her politely, though I detected an undercurrent of tension in his voice as well. "Sirik," she responded coolly. The atmosphere in the room suddenly felt charged with unspoken conflict. I glanced between them, trying to understand what I was missing. "I've always envied people with siblings." Elsa suddenly blurted out and smiled, just to clear the tension. "You don't have to envy mine, though. My brothers can be yours too if you'd like," I replied, tilting my head with a blinding smile. I meant it as a joke, a way to include her in our family dynamic, but Sirik's reaction was immediate and harsh. "I already have enough sisters." "Thank you very much," he said, his tone harsher than I'd ever heard him use with anyone. Elsa's face flushed with anger, and she straightened to her full height. "Don't worry, Sirik. I wouldn't dream of imposing myself on your perfect family dynamic." Before either Sirik or I could respond, She turned on her heel and stalked back to the bedroom, leaving us standing in stunned silence. What just happened? I asked Sirik, genuinely confused by the sudden shift in atmosphere. He ran a hand through his hair, looking more troubled than I'd seen him in a long time. It is complicated, Zarel. Try me, I pressed, moving to settle onto the couch in the hallway and patting the cushion beside me. I may have been isolated for 3 years, but I am not oblivious. Sirik sat down heavily, his shoulders sagging with the weight of whatever burden he was carrying. Elsa and I, we're destined mates. The revelation hit me like a thunderbolt. Destined mates were rare, precious bonds that most wolves spent their entire lives hoping to find. The fact that Elsa and Sirik had found each other should have been cause for celebration, but she has rejected the bond. Sirik continued, his voice heavy with pain, but he hid it well. She has chosen Lucas instead. Beta's son from the Lightning Pack. My blood ran cold at the mention of Lucas's name. I remembered him all too well from his visits to our pack. He was handsome in a conventional way, but something was unsettling about his persistent attention toward any unmated female. I recalled several uncomfortable encounters with him when Elsa had been away. His advances had made me deeply uncomfortable. Lucas's trouble, Sirik, I said carefully. He is charming on the surface, but underneath there is something predatory about him. The way he pursues women, especially when they're vulnerable or alone. Sirik nodded grimly. I know exactly what kind of person he is, but Elsa refuses to see it. She thinks I am just being possessive or jealous. What are you going to do? Wait, he said simply. I am going to help her see the truth about Lucas. And then I am going to wait for her to realize what we could have together. The mate bond doesn't just disappear because someone rejects it. It'll always be there, pulling us toward each other. Before I could respond to this revelation, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. To my surprise, Calden's sister's name appeared on the screen, and my stomach immediately clenched with dread. She had never called me before, even if I had her number, and given everything that had happened recently, her timing seemed perfect. Hello, Selena, I answered cautiously. Zarel, her voice was sickeningly sweet, with an underlying edge that made my skin crawl. I hope you are enjoying your little vacation from reality, because it is about to come to an abrupt end. What are you talking about? My voice remained calm. Let's just say that certain arrangements are being made, and very soon you'll find yourself in a much more restrictive environment. I do hope you've made peace with your choices, because you are going to have plenty of time to reflect on them. The line went dead before I could say a word, leaving me staring at my phone with growing dread. Selena's words had been deliberately vague, but the threat was unmistakable. Whatever was coming, it wasn't going to be good. After Selena's scary phone call, I felt sick to my stomach. I went back to where Sirik was sitting. He looked worried too. I sat down next to him and took a deep breath. Sirik, I think we need to talk about what happened now with Elsa, I said softly. She looked really upset. You saw it. That was harsh regardless. Sirik nodded. I know, I shouldn't have been so mean to her. But why did you say that? About not wanting another sister? Since she isn't interested in a relationship with you, I said, cautiously. Sirik looked down at his hands. Because she is not just a friend to me, Zarel. She is my destined mate, like I said before. Having her as a sister would be wrong. I understood. It must be really hard for him to watch Elsa choose someone else when fate had picked them to be together. Maybe I should go talk to her, I said. I stood up and walked back to the room. Elsa, can I come in? Sure, she said, but her voice sounded flat. I opened the door and found her sitting on the bed. Looking out the window, her eyes were red as if she had been crying. I am sorry about what Sirik said, I told her as I sat down beside her. He didn't mean to hurt you. Elsa turned to look at me. Zarel, I know you were trying to help, but you don't understand. Sirik thinks just because we're destined mates, I should choose him, but I don't want what fate picked for me. But why? I asked. I am not saying this to make my brother look better before you, but he is a good guy. He is kind and smart, and he really cares about you. Elsa shook her head. I fell in love with Lucas before I even transformed and found out about the mate bond. I was 17 when I met him, and he was so different from all the other boys. He made me feel special. I felt worried when she said this. I remembered Lucas and how he acted around girls. Elsa, are you sure about him? I mean, really sure. Yes, she said firmly. He is going to help me run the Lightning Pack's business. I won't have to worry about boring pack stuff. I can just have fun and enjoy life. This made me feel angry. Not angry at Elsa, but angry at the situation. Elsa, listen to me. No one can take your place in the Lightning Pack. You are going to be the alpha when your father steps down. That is your responsibility. I don't want that responsibility, she said. Lucas can handle it. But what about you? I asked. What will you do? Just sit around and have fun forever. Elsa looked confused. What is wrong with that? I stood up and started pacing around the room. Elsa, you need to grow up. Even if you choose Lucas, you should have your own career, your own goals. You can't just let someone else run your life. Why not? She asked, cocking a brow. Because look what happened to me, I said, my voice getting louder. I let Calden make all the decisions. I didn't have my own job or my own money. When he left me, I had nothing. I just returned to the family broken into pieces. I don't want that to happen to you. Elsa's face got red. That is different. Lucas loves me. He won't leave me as Calden left you. It stung. But I pushed that feeling away as fast as it came. You don't know that, I said. I'd suggest you think about it. I don't want to talk about this anymore, Elsa said, turning away from me. You don't understand what it is like to have choices. You never did. Her words hurt even more. But I knew she was just upset. I left the room and went downstairs. Sirik was seated on the couch when I arrived, looking stoic as he went through his laptop. How did it go? He asked without looking at me. Not good, I said. She is really set on this Lucas. I figured, Sirik said with a sigh, finally looking at me. I guess I just have to wait and hope she figures it out. I was about to say something else when I heard Elsa's shriek from upstairs. Zarel, come here right now. Immediately, I ran upstairs, worried something was wrong. I found Elsa sitting on the bed with her laptop open as well. Her face was pale, and she looked shocked. What is wrong? I asked. Look at this, she said, turning the laptop toward me. On the screen was a post from the Sunlight Ridge Pack's official forum. The title made my blood momentarily run cold. Former Luna Zarel Stormy, accused of stealing priceless diamond necklace. I sat down hard on the bed and read the post. It said that after my divorce, a very expensive diamond necklace had gone missing from the pack house. The necklace was worth millions of dollars. The post said I was the main suspect because I had access to it, and I left right after the divorce. So this is what Selena meant, I whispered. She said I would be confined soon. A smirk tugged at the corners of my lips as I read more. The post had hundreds of comments already. People were calling me a thief and saying terrible things about me. Some people I thought were my friends were agreeing with the accusations. This is crazy, Elsa said, her gaze darkening. You would never steal anything. I mean, what would even make you steal such a cheap thing? I bit my lower lip, taking in a deep breath. It doesn't matter what is true. They're making it look like I did it. We have to fight this, Elsa said. I'll post something defending you. No, I said quickly, waving my hand dismissively. It was my mess to clean up. I need to handle this myself. I sat still, thinking about what I could do, and then I remembered something. Elsa, can I borrow that? I gestured towards her laptop, and she nodded with a narrowed gaze. Of course, I could see the fear in her eyes for me. But I was already past that. I opened a new tab and went to my social media account. I hadn't used it since my divorce, but I still had access. I took a deep breath and started typing. I want to tell everyone the truth about my divorce and these accusations, I wrote. I never stole any necklace. I left my marriage because my husband was betrayal of trust on his brother's lover. Then I did something I never thought I would do. I uploaded the photo Thessaly had sent to me. The one that had them together. Even though it had hurt me, I still kept it as proof. Thessaly shot herself in the leg when she actually sent it to me. Although I never planned to use them publicly, here is proof of why I really left. I added to my post. But I wasn't done. I remembered something else. A few months ago, I saw Selena at a casino. She was wearing a beautiful diamond necklace that looked very familiar. At the time, I didn't think much about it. But now, I realized it might be the same necklace they were accusing me of stealing. I found a photo from that night on another pack member's social media page. Selena was in the background, and you could clearly see the necklace she was wearing. I saved the photo and uploaded it to my post. This photo shows Selena, Calden's sister, wearing the necklace in question at a casino. I wrote, "This photo was taken before my divorce even happened." I tagged the casino in the post and asked them to check if the necklace had been pawned there. "There," I said, hitting the post button. "Now everyone can see the truth." Elsa looked at me with amazement. "Zarel, that was really smart. You have proof of everything." Within minutes, my post started getting attention. People were sharing it and commenting. Many of them were apologizing for believing the accusations without proof. Then something amazing happened. The casino I had tagged in my post actually replied to my tag. They said they could confirm that a diamond necklace matching the description had been pawned at their establishment. The person who pawned it was Selena, and it happened 2 weeks before my divorce was even finalized. "They confirmed it," I said, showing Elsa the comment. "Selena pawned the necklace before I even left the pack." More and more people started commenting in support of me. They said they were sorry for believing the lies, and that they should have known I would never steal anything. "I can't believe Selena tried to frame you," Elsa whispered. "That is so evil." "I can believe it," I said calmly. "They all never liked me. They would do anything to destroy me, and Selena probably thought this would be the perfect way to get revenge. But from now on, I will always be one step ahead of them." My phone was buzzing non-stop with notifications, the constant vibrations making it dance across my nightstand. So I picked it up to see what was happening. The forum post I made earlier had exploded. Thousands of people were commenting, sharing, and reacting. The notification count kept climbing even as I watched. 2847 comments, 5623 shares, 12,409 reactions. But what shocked me most was what people were saying about Calden and his family. "Look at this betrayal of trust alpha, trying to frame his innocent ex-wife. The Sunlight Ridge pack is full of liars and thieves. How can we trust a pack leader who can't even treat his own mate with respect? Selena should be in jail for theft and fraud." The comments went on, page after page of outraged supporters. People were not just supporting me, they were absolutely destroying Calden's reputation. Some were even posting photos of Calden and Thessaly together from other events, showing that their affair had been going on for much longer than I thought. The timestamps on these photos went back over a year. I scrolled through more comments and saw something that made my jaw drop. People were talking about boycotting all the businesses connected to the Sunlight Ridge pack. Some were saying they would never work with any Sunlight Ridge companies again. Others were organizing protests outside their corporate headquarters. The anger was palpable, and it was spreading like wildfire across social media platforms. Zarel. Elsa's voice came from downstairs, breaking through my concentration. Come down here. You need to see this. I rushed downstairs, my heart pounding with anticipation and a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. I found Elsa sitting on the couch in the living room with her laptop open and a huge smile on her face. Her hair was still messy from sleep, and she was wearing her favorite oversized sweater. But her eyes were bright with excitement. Look at this, she said, pointing at the screen with barely contained glee. The stock prices for all the Sunlight Ridge Pack businesses have crashed. They've lost millions of dollars overnight. I stared at the financial news website she was showing me, my eyes widening as I took in the devastating numbers. Every company connected to the Sunlight Ridge Pack was showing red numbers, like a sea of financial blood. Their stock prices had dropped by 20, 30, or even 40%. In some cases, the market cap losses were staggering. Tens of millions of dollars wiped out in a matter of hours. This is because of my post, I asked, hardly believing it. My voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Yes. Elsa jumped up and hugged me tightly, her happiness infectious. You did this, Sorel. You brought down their whole corrupt system with just the truth. She spun me around the living room, both of us laughing like teenagers. The sound of our laughter echoed off the walls, filling the space with a joy I hadn't felt in so long. The Queen has returned, she shouted, throwing her arms up in the air. My best friend is back, and she is stronger than ever. I felt a complex mix of emotions swirling through me. Part of me was elated that the truth was finally out there, that people were seeing Calden and his family for who they really were. But part of me felt worried about what this meant for all the innocent people caught in the crossfire. I had never wanted to hurt people who were just trying to make a living. Elsa, what if good people lose their jobs because of this? I asked, sinking into the couch. The weight of potential consequences was settling on my shoulders. What if there are families who depend on those companies for their income? Don't you dare feel guilty, Elsa said firmly, her tone becoming serious as she sat down beside me. She reached across the table and grabbed my hands, her grip warm and reassuring. You didn't start this fight. You just finished it. Calden and his pack brought this on themselves with their lies and schemes. She was right, and I knew it logically. I had only told the truth. If the truth was damaging to them, that was their problem, not mine. We spent the morning reading through all the comments and reactions, sharing the laptop between us as we scrolled through page after page of responses. It was amazing to see how many people were supporting me, but even more incredible to see how my story had given others the courage to speak up. Many shared their own stories of being mistreated by powerful pack members who thought they could get away with anything. But then I remembered the conversation I had had last night about Lucas and her future, and I felt a familiar surge of protective concern for my best friend. Pushing this current situation aside, I turned to face Elsa. Elsa, I said carefully, looking up from the laptop screen, I hope you've been thinking about what I said yesterday, about having your own career and not just depending on someone else. Elsa stuck her tongue out at me playfully, her expression lighthearted despite the serious conversation. Plus, she seemed better than yesterday. I like Lucas, and that is not changing. But you know what? If any problems come up, I know you'll be there to help me figure them out. I looked at my best friend, taking in her confident smile and the way she seemed so sure of herself. Despite my worries, I had to admire her optimism and trust in our friendship. I'll always be there for you, no matter what. Good, she said with a grin, closing the laptop with a satisfied snap. Now let's get ready for the day. Something tells me tomorrow is going to be another crazy day, and we need to be prepared for whatever comes next. I nodded. As we headed upstairs, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for Elsa's unwavering friendship. Even though I worried about her choices and her tendency to dive headfirst into relationships, I knew she needed to make her own mistakes and learn from them. All I could do was be there to support her when she needed me. just as she had been there for me during my darkest moments. The morning started with the unfortunate sound of my assistant's heels clicking urgently across the marble floor of my office. I didn't look up from the contract I was reviewing. Panic in subordinates was nothing new. And I'd learned long ago that acknowledging it too quickly only made it worse. "Alpha Calden," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. "We need to discuss the forum situation immediately." I set down my gold-plated pen and glanced at her with mild interest. "What forum situation?" "The post about Luna Zarel." "Sir, it is everywhere." I pulled up the PAC forum on my computer, scanning the post that had apparently caused such distress. Zarel's words were direct, factual, devastating. Photos of Thessaly, and me evidence of Selena's theft, timestamps that made our PAC and family look like amateur criminals. Elegant. Really, I had to appreciate the precision of it. Deep down, I wanted to smash everything in my way, but it wouldn't fix this mess. "And the business impact?" I asked, already knowing the answer from my assistant's expression. "Stock prices are down 20 to 40% across all holdings. The media won't stop calling." I leaned back in my leather chair, considering this development. Most men would be furious, panicked, scrambling for damage control. But I found myself oddly impressed. In one night, Zarel had accomplished what years of corporate warfare hadn't. She'd actually made me pay attention. Within the hour, my conference room was filled with advisors, all talking at once about crisis management and public relations disasters. I listened with detached amusement as they painted apocalyptic scenarios. "Alpha, we need to respond immediately," my head of PR insisted. "The longer we wait, the worse this gets." "And what exactly would you have me say?" I asked calmly. "Are the photos fake? That my sister didn't pawn the necklace? We'd only be adding lies to an already messy situation." The room fell silent. They weren't used to me being this reasonable about attacks on our reputation. Aldrin arrived looking uncharacteristically flustered. "Alpha, I've tried everything. The post can't be removed, and it has been pinned to the top of the forum for 72 hours. "Pinned? By whom?" "Brad Merricks, CEO of Halverse Entertainment." Now that was interesting. Brad Merricks wasn't someone who acted without purpose, and his entertainment empire had enough influence to make this gesture significant. His involvement suggested this was about more than just justice. It was personal. "Do we have any connection to the Merricks?" I asked. "None that I can find," Aldrin replied. "But his interest in this situation implies a connection to Zarel. The possibility that Zarel had moved on, found someone new, someone successful enough to challenge me publicly, was intriguing rather than infuriating. Good for her, honestly, although a part of me felt weird. My wolf, especially. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Mother. Her name on the screen made disgust materialize on my face. "Calden." Her voice was shrill with panic. "You need to come home right now. This is a disaster." I sighed, and hurriedly left the office for Aldrin. To round up, I arrived at the pack house to find my mother pacing, like a caged animal, her usual composure completely shattered. "How could you let this happen?" she demanded the moment I walked through the door. I settled into my usual chair, crossing one ankle over my knee with deliberate casualness. I wasn't aware I had let anything happen. That post. The accusations. She is destroying our reputation. Actually. "Mother, you destroyed our reputation when you ordered that theft accusation without consulting me." My voice remained perfectly level. Zarel simply provided the correction. Mother stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. "How are you so calm about this?" "Because hysteria won't change anything." I stood, adjusting my suit jacket. Besides, being outmaneuvered by someone I underestimated is almost refreshing. I left her, and returned to the company. Back in my office, I found myself curious about something I'd never bothered to explore before. When was the last time I'd actually looked at Zarel's social media presence during our marriage? Her profile from 3 years ago revealed a woman I barely recognized. Every post radiated genuine happiness, love, and gratitude. She documented our relationship as if it were the greatest thing that had ever happened to her. 3 years married and Calden still makes me feel like the luckiest woman alive. Grateful every day to be part of the Sunlight Ridge Pack family. The enthusiasm in her posts was almost painful to read. When had that light dimmed? I scrolled through months of content, watching her joy gradually fade into polite, distant updates. Curious now, I opened our private message thread. The conversation history was brutally one-sided. My messages read like a corporate memo. Doctor appointment at 2:30. Don't be late. Blood needed by Friday. Pack dinner tonight. Wear the blue dress. Her responses were always immediate, always compliant. Of course. I'll be there. Thank you for letting me know. 3 years of marriage, and I'd never once sent her a message that wasn't purely transactional. No good morning texts, no asking about her day, no expressions of affection whatsoever. I stared at the screen, a cold realization settling over me. I hadn't just been a distant husband. I'd actually been a stranger living in the same house as someone who'd loved me completely. On impulse, I tried to access her current profile, only to discover I'd been blocked. The finality of it was almost amusing. Even in cutting me out, Zarel had been thorough. I sat back in my chair, fingers steepled. Considering the situation objectively, the woman I'd married had given me everything 20 her love and her loyalty, and I'd been too focused on building an empire to notice any of it. Now she was gone, and instead of the compliant Luna I'd taken for granted, I was facing someone with the strategic mind to orchestrate my very public humbling. It was, I had to admit, rather magnificent. I picked up my phone and called Aldrin. Cancel the investigation into Zarel's whereabouts. Alpha, you heard me. Call it off immediately. There was a long pause. Are you certain about this? I looked out at the city skyline I'd spent years conquering. Then back at the message thread that told the story of a marriage I'd never actually participated in. I am certain, I said quietly. Zarel and I are finished. As I ended the call, I realized I felt something unfamiliar respect, mixed with genuine regret. My ex-wife had just executed a flawless strategic victory against someone who'd never bothered to see her as an opponent. Perhaps I'd never really seen her at all, and it was too late to pursue her. A month later, the crystal chandeliers radiated welcoming lights across the marble floors of the Mazatian packhouse, catching every sequin and jewel adorning the elite wolves gathered for the annual pack revelry. I stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, my emerald gown flowing like liquid silk around my ankles, watching the spectacle unfold with a mixture of dread and curiosity. 1 month had passed since my father and I struck our deal, no return banquet in my honor. But mandatory attendance at this gathering I'd successfully avoided for years. Alpha Merrick had made his intentions crystal clear. He wanted me to survey the field of eligible he-wolves, to find someone who could make me forget the Ashmores entirely. If only he knew how impossible that task would prove to be. The irony wasn't lost on me. The emerald fabric hugged my curves in all the right places, and I'd let my auburn hair cascade in loose waves down my back. If I were going to be displayed like a prize, I'd make sure I looked worthy of the pedestal. You look stunning, Zarel, came a familiar voice behind me. I turned to find Pierre Blackwood, son of the Northridge Pack Alpha, approaching with 2 champagne flutes. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his tuxedo impeccable, but his smile held an edge that made my wolf bristle with unease. Pierre, I acknowledged, accepting the champagne with practiced grace. I didn't expect to see you here. How could I miss the opportunity to see the famous Zerel Famir make her debut? His eyes raked over me appreciatively, and I had to resist the urge to step back. I heard about the divorce. Terrible business, but perhaps it is for the best. You deserve someone who truly appreciates what they have. Before I could respond, a ripple of excitement swept through the crowd. Heads turned toward the main entrance. Conversations died mid-sentence, and I felt my heart skip a beat despite myself. Even without looking, I knew who had arrived. Calden Ashmore commanded attention the moment he stepped into the ballroom. His black tuxedo was perfectly tailored, emphasizing his broad shoulders and lean frame. His dark hair was styled just messy enough to suggest he'd run his fingers through it, and those piercing dark eyes swept the room with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. But it wasn't Calden alone who had caused the stir. Thessaly Ashmore walked beside him, her arm threaded through his with elegance. She wore a stunning red gown that clung to her curves like a second skin. Her blonde hair swept up in an elaborate updo that showcased the diamond necklace at her throat. My breath caught in my throat, not from jealousy. I was surprised to find that particular emotion remarkably absent, but from the sheer audacity of it all. Thessaly had orchestrated her hospital charade barely a month ago, hoping to manipulate Calden into taking her back. When that failed spectacularly, she'd apparently decided on a more direct approach. Well, Pierre," murmured beside me, his voice dripping with malicious amusement. "It seems your replacement isn't wasting any time making her claim known." I watched as Thessaly smiled and nodded at the crowd, basking in the attention that came from being on Calden's arm. But I could see what others might miss. The slight tension in Calden's jaw, the way his eyes remained distant and cold, the careful space he maintained between them despite their linked arms. He was tolerating her presence. Nothing more. More interesting was what I could sense through the pack bonds that still lingered despite my divorce. Calden's emotions were carefully controlled, but underneath the polished exterior, I detected frustration, resignation, and something else, a restless energy that suggested he was here under duress. Thessaly, on the other hand, practically vibrated with ambition and barely contained excitement. She thought this was her moment, her chance to cement her position as the future Luna of Sunlight Ridge Pack. The poor fool had no idea she was merely a convenient accessory for the evening. "Zerel." Pierre's voice pulled me from my observations. "You seem distracted, just taking in the scenery," I replied smoothly, raising my champagne flute to my lips. The bubbles tickled my tongue, but I barely tasted them. "It has been a while since I've attended one of these gatherings. Too long, in my opinion," he said, moving closer. "You've been hiding your light under a bushel, lying in the shadows when you should be leading from the front." His words might have been flattering if I hadn't detected the underlying tone. Pierre Blackwood was known for his political ambitions, and I was certain he saw me as a potential stepping stone to greater influence within the werewolf hierarchy. A commotion near the entrance drew my attention once again, and my heart did an entirely different kind of skip when I saw Cyric striding through the crowd. My breath caught as I took in his appearance. Gone was the casual attire I was used to seeing him in, replaced by a silver tuxedo that transformed him from handsome to absolutely devastating. The silver fabric seemed to shimmer with each step, complementing his hair that was just the same color as mine, and making his blue eyes appear almost luminescent in the light. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator conversations, pausing in his wake as heads turned to follow his progress across the ballroom. And he was heading straight for me. "Excuse me, Pierre," I murmured, not waiting for his response as I moved to meet Cyric halfway. When our eyes met across the room, he grinned at me. "My brother, the heartthrob of Missatian Pack, Zerel," he said when he reached me, his voice low and warm. He took my hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to my knuckles that sent shivers racing up my arm. "You look absolutely Famir, and you look like you are trying to start a war, Mr. Famir." I replied, and we both burst out laughing. Seriously, if war is what it takes, I am definitely fighting. I could feel the weight of stares from across the room, could practically hear the whispers starting to spread like wildfire through the crowd. The divorced Omega with the famous Alpha Cyric. Not many people knew of our bond anyway. Let them wonder. The questions would come soon enough, along with the speculation and the gossip. As if summoned by my thoughts, a reporter appeared at my elbow. Microphone extended and eyes bright with the scent of a story. Miss Stormy, can you comment on your relationship with Alpha Cyric? Are the rumors of a romantic involvement true? More reporters began to converge, and I felt my chest tighten with familiar anxiety. This was exactly why I'd avoided public appearances for so long. The scrutiny, the judgment, the way every word would be twisted and analyzed until the truth became unrecognizable. Cyric must have sensed my distress, because he moved closer. His presence both protective and reassuring. Through our eyes, I felt him ask silently if I wanted him to handle the situation. Cyric always asked for my permission to do things for me. Show them. I communicated through our mind link, giving him the permission he sought. His smile turned predatory, and I knew the real entertainment was about to begin. Cyric Famir was about to make his move. The moment I gave Cyric permission through our mind link, I watched his entire demeanor shift. The mischievous glint in his blue eyes sharpened into something far more dangerous, and his casual smile transformed into the kind of expression that made seasoned alphas take a step back. Of course I'll answer your questions, Cyric said to the gathering reporters, his voice carrying easily over the murmur of the crowd. Though I think introductions are in order first. He moved with fluid grace, positioning himself slightly in front of me in a protective gesture. The reporters leaned in eagerly, sensing they were about to witness something newsworthy. Ladies and gentlemen, Cyric continued, his voice projecting with the natural authority of a born leader, allow me to present the remarkable Zarel, former Luna of Sunlight Ridge, current strategic advisor to multiple pack alliances, and undoubtedly the most intelligent woman in this room. A flush of heat crept up my neck at his words, but before I could process the compliment fully, I caught sight of movement across the ballroom. Calden and Thessaly were making their way toward us, drawn by the commotion like moths to a flame. My ex-husband's face was carefully neutral, but I could read the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested he was far from pleased with this development. Thessaly, on the other hand, looked like she was barely containing her excitement at the prospect of drama. Alpha Famir, came Calden's voice as they approached, cutting through the reporter's eager questions. How unexpected to see you here. Cyric turned slowly, his smile never wavering, but somehow becoming more razor-sharp. Alpha Ashmore, the pleasure is all mine, I am sure. The temperature in our immediate vicinity seemed to drop several degrees as the two alphas faced each other. I could feel the tension radiating from both men, their wolves sizing each other up, even as they maintained the veneer of civilized conversation. Calden, darling, Thessaly interjected, her voice saccharine sweet as she tightened her grip on his arm. You should introduce me to your former wife's new companion. The way she emphasized former made my teeth clench, but I kept my expression carefully neutral. This was Cyric's show now, and I was curious to see how he'd handle Thessaly's particular brand of venom. Of course, Cyric replied smoothly, inclining his head toward Thessaly with mock courtesy. You must be Thessaly Ashmore. I've heard so much about you. Thessaly preened under what she clearly interpreted as a compliment, missing entirely the subtle edge in Cyric's tone. All good things, I hope. Oh, absolutely fascinating things, Cyric assured her, and I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. Your reputation precedes you, particularly regarding your flexibility in relationships. The barb hit its mark, and I watched Thessaly's carefully constructed composure falter for just a moment before she rallied. I am sure I don't know what you mean, she said, her voice rising slightly. Though I suppose as someone new to our social circle, you might not understand the complexities of pack politics and marriages of convenience. Thessaly, Calden warned quietly, but she was already committed to her course. After all, she continued, her smile turning vicious, the woman beside you was just divorced and exiled from her own pack. Hardly the most stable choice for someone in your position. The crowd around us had gone silent, everyone straining to catch every word of what was rapidly becoming the most entertaining spectacle of the evening. I felt a flicker of my old insecurities rise, the familiar sting of being reduced to my failures and shame. But then Cyric laughed, a rich, genuinely amused sound that made Thessaly's confident expression waver. Exiled? He repeated, as if the word was particularly amusing. Is that what you are calling it? How creative! He turned to address the crowd that had gathered around us, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have a fundamental misunderstanding here. Miss Sorrel wasn't exiled, she was liberated. There is quite a difference. Though I understand how someone with limited experience in successful relationships might confuse the two. Thessaly's face flushed red, but Cyric wasn't finished. You see, he continued conversationally, there is something particularly fascinating about individuals who make a habit of, shall we say, repositioning themselves strategically within family structures. Take our dear Thessaly here, for example. I watched in fascination as Cyric circled his prey, his tone remaining perfectly polite, even as his words turned deadly. It is quite remarkable, really. First married to Dalen Ashmore, may he rest in peace, and now setting her sights on his brother. One might call it pragmatic. Others might use less charitable terms. The crowd was hanging on every word now, and I could see several people pulling out their phones to record the exchange. This would be all over the werewolf social networks within the hour. How dare you? Thessaly began, her composure finally cracking completely. Oh, but I am not finished, Cyric interrupted smoothly. Because there is more to the story, isn't there? The strategic hospital visits. The carefully orchestrated emergencies designed to manipulate a grieving widow back into a relationship he'd already chosen to leave. Quite the elaborate performance, though ultimately unsuccessful. Thessaly's face had gone from red to white, tears of rage and humiliation gathering in her eyes. She turned desperately to Calden, clearly expecting him to defend her honor, to shut down this very public destruction of her reputation. But Calden remained silent. His jaw clenched tight as he watched the scene unfold. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the desire to maintain his dignity, warring with whatever obligation he felt toward Thessaly. Calden, Thessaly pleaded, her voice breaking slightly. Are you going to let him speak to me this way? The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting for his response. This was the moment that would define not just tonight, but potentially the future dynamics between all our packs. Calden's eyes met mine briefly, and I saw something flash there. Regret, perhaps, or recognition of just how far we'd all fallen from where we'd started. Then his gaze shifted to Cyric, and I recognized the look of a man who was finally seeing his competition clearly. Thessaly, he said quietly, his voice carrying despite its low volume, perhaps it would be best if you composed yourself. It wasn't the defense she'd been hoping for, and the dismissal in his tone was unmistakable. Thessaly's face crumpled, the carefully constructed mask of sophistication finally slipping completely. I need some air, she whispered, then turned and fled toward the garden doors, her red gown trailing behind her like a banner of defeat. The crowd began to disperse, conversations resuming in excited whispers as people processed what they'd just witnessed. The reporters were frantically scribbling notes, already composing the headlines that would dominate tomorrow's pack newsletters. Calden stood alone now, his carefully controlled facade showing the first cracks I'd seen since our divorce. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, then at Sirik with something that might have been respect or resignation. "Well played," he said simply, then turned to follow Thessaly toward the garden. As he walked away, I felt Sirik's hand settle gently on the small of my back. A gesture of support and solidarity that sent a sibling warmth spreading through my chest. "That was quite a performance," I murmured, not trusting my voice to remain steady at full volume. "Just getting started," he replied, his breath warm against my ear. "The real show begins now." And as I watched Calden's retreating figure disappear through the garden doors, I realized that Sirik was absolutely right. Whatever happened next would determine not just the course of this evening, but the trajectory of all our futures. The game had officially begun, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I might actually be on the winning side. The cool night air did nothing to calm the inferno of rage burning in my chest as I stood in the mansion's garden. My manicured nails digging into my palms. The humiliation Sirik Famir had subjected me to in front of everyone, no less replayed in my mind, like a broken record. Each word stoking the flames of my fury higher. How dare that arrogant alpha speak to me, like I was some common pack whore, all because of that manipulative adversary Zarel. The way he'd looked at me with such disdain, as if I were something disgusting he'd scraped off his shoe, made my skin crawl with a mixture of shame and murderous intent. But even as the rage threatened to consume me, a voice whispered warnings in the back of my mind. I couldn't afford to lose control here. Not when I was wearing a dress worth more than most wolves made in 5 years. A dress that wasn't mine. I forced myself to take slow, measured breaths, my hands smoothing down the silk fabric of the red dress. The Valentino creation was absolutely exquisite, hugging my curves in all the right places and flowing like starlight with every movement. Of course, no one could know that this masterpiece was merely borrowed, on loan from one of the most exclusive fashion houses in the world, for their new advertising campaign. The price tag attached to this single garment was absolutely insane, enough to buy a small territory or fund a pack's operations for months. If anyone discovered the truth, if Calden found out what I'd done to secure this dress, I couldn't think about that now. His strategy was simple. Utilize this borrowed masterpiece to project an aura of immense wealth and influence, ensuring the alliance partners believed I held total control over the estate's grand legacy. He'd never suspect that his generous payment wouldn't even cover 1/10 of the dress's actual value. After all, what was one more lie in this trap of my existence? I'd built my entire life on strategic omissions and manipulations. This was just another one in my existence. Steadying myself, I lifted my chin and walked back toward the mansion. The borrowed gown moved like a dream around my legs, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction at how magnificent I looked. Let Zarel try to compete with this level of elegance. The ballroom was still buzzing with energy when I returned, conversations flowing like expensive wine as the werewolf elite mingled and schemed. My eyes immediately began scanning the crowd, searching for Calden's familiar figure among the sea of tuxedos and glittering gowns. I found him near the east side of the ballroom, engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation with 2 other men. The 3 men stood in a tight circle, their body language suggesting they were discussing matters of importance, probably territory disputes or alliance negotiations. Perfect. This was exactly the kind of scene I needed to insert myself into, to remind everyone present that I was Calden's chosen partner, his equal in all things political and social. I approached them, my smile perfectly calibrated to appear both deferential and confident. Without hesitation, I slipped my arm through Calden's, feeling the warmth of his bicep beneath the expensive fabric of his tuxedo. The moment our arms linked, I felt him stiffen. It was subtle, so slight that the alphas he was speaking with probably didn't notice. But I felt the way his muscles tensed, the almost shift in his posture that suggested my presence was unwelcome. A tinge of anxiety flared in my chest, but I held firm, tightening my grip on his arm and maintaining my expression. I couldn't afford to show weakness now, not when there were so many eyes watching, evaluating, and judging. Alpha Hendricks, I said smoothly, nodding graciously to the older man I recognized from days back. How wonderful to see you again. I trust your territory expansions are proceeding well. But even as I engaged in the expected pleasantries, I became acutely aware that Calden's attention had drifted elsewhere. His gaze was moving across the ballroom with predatory focus, and I followed the direction of his stare until my eyes landed on the source of his distraction. Zarel and Sirik. They were standing near the buffet table, both holding china plates filled with gourmet delicacies. But it wasn't the food that made my vision blur with sudden, overwhelming hatred. It was the way they were laughing together, their heads bent close as they shared some private joke that excluded the rest of the world. Zarel looked radiant in her emerald silk gown, the color making her auburn hair shine like burnished copper under the chandeliers. Those diamond earrings, probably worth more than my borrowed dress, caught the light with every movement of her head, creating tiny rainbows that danced across her throat. And that clutch she carried so casually. I recognized it as a limited edition piece from a designer so exclusive that they only made 12 pieces worldwide. Everything about her screamed wealth, power, and effortless sophistication. Everything I had to fight and scheme and lie to achieve, she seemed to possess naturally. The injustice of it made my stomach churn with envy. How did she do it? How did Zarel manage to attract powerful, influential men so effortlessly? First, she'd wrapped Calden around her. And now, the very moment she was free of that union, she'd somehow ensnared Sirik Fimir, an alpha whose power and influence made Calden look like a minor pack leader by comparison. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. I worked 10 times harder than she ever had, sacrificed more, planned more carefully, and yet she glided through life collecting powerful men like they were pendants or something. The sight of Sirik's hand, resting possessively on the small of her back, made my vision go red around the edges. The way he looked at her, like she was something precious and fragile that needed protecting, was exactly how I dreamed of being looked at my entire life. She had everything I'd ever wanted, everything I'd schemed and clawed and fought to achieve, and she treated it all like it was her natural birthright. I hated her, goddess. How I hated her. I hated her perfect hair that never seemed to have a strand out of place. I hated her flawless skin that glowed like she'd been kissed by moonlight. I hated her laugh, her smile, her effortless grace. I hated the way she made expensive gowns look like they'd been designed specifically for her body. I hated those diamond earrings. I hated that limited edition clutch that she carried like it was nothing special. But most of all, I hated the way Alpha Famir treated her, like she was some kind of goddess, worthy of worship and protection. The same man who had humiliated me in front of half the werewolf elite was now feeding her strawberries and hanging on her every word like she was distributing divine wisdom. The injustice of it burned through my veins like liquid fire, and I had to fight to keep my expression neutral as the desire for revenge built up in my mind. Zarel thought she was untouchable, protected by her new alpha's influence and her own charm. But she was wrong. Everyone had weaknesses. Everyone had secrets. And I would find hers. I would make her pay for tonight's humiliation. I would make her pay for stealing what should have been mine. I would tear down her perfect little world piece by piece until she was left with nothing but ashes and regret. The tears of frustrated rage that had been threatening to spill finally gathered at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away furiously. I couldn't afford to show weakness, not here or now. Too many people were watching and waiting for any sign that I was cracking under the pressure. After what Sirik did, Alpha Hendricks and the other man finally moved on to other conversations, leaving Calden and me standing alone in our little awkwardness. This was my chance to salvage something from this disastrous evening, to play the role that had served me so well in the past. I turned to face him fully, letting my voice drop to a soft, vulnerable whisper that I knew he found difficult to resist. "Calden," I began, my words carefully chosen to convey just the right amount of hurt. "I am so sorry about earlier. I know I crossed a line and I shut the hell up." The words hit me like a physical blow, cold and harsh and utterly without mercy. Calden's hand closed around mine with bruising force, his grip tight enough to make my bones ache. "Until this gathering is over," he continued, his voice low and dangerous, "you will keep your mouth shut, you will smile, you will play your part, and you will not embarrass me further." Before I could process the threat fully, he was already moving, pulling me along as he moved to another cluster of important-looking wolves. His grip on my hand never loosened. As we approached the new group, I forced my expression into a normal composure. But inside, the darkness was spreading like spilled ink through water. Tonight had been a disaster, but it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. I would definitely get back at Zarel. I adjusted my cufflinks for the third time in 10 minutes, a nervous habit I developed whenever I was trying to keep my composure. The encounter with Sirik and Zarel had rattled me more than I cared to admit, but I couldn't let it show. Not here, not at the Missation Pack Ball. This event was one of the most important networking opportunities of the year. The Missation Pack rarely hosted such grand gatherings, making invitations incredibly exclusive and hard to come by. I'd pulled strings and called in favors just to get through those doors tonight. There was no way I was going to let personal drama derail what could be career-defining connections. But damn it, seeing Zarel on Sirik's arm had hit me harder than expected. The way she looked at him, the easy familiarity between them. It made something ugly twist in my gut. Was I jealous? Maybe. But more than that, I was scared. Scared that she'd moved on so completely in 1 month while I was still here, still thinking about her at the worst possible moments. And then, there was the shame, too. I shook my head, forcing those thoughts away. Focus. That is what I needed to do. Focus on why I was here. Thessaly's earlier outburst had nearly ruined everything. The way she'd confronted Zarel, the scene she'd caused, it had taken every ounce of self-control I possessed not to cut her loose right there. But I needed her to play the part of my partner tonight. I couldn't afford any more distractions. Not when there were deals to be made and alliances to forge. Hide. Weth. Zarel's. Pofave. I stood by the pool area, holding a crystal glass of sparkling champagne and trying not to look as bored as I felt. The night air was cooler out here, a welcome relief from the stuffy ballroom where everyone was trying too hard to impress each other. Goddess, I hated these things. All the fake smiles, the meaningless small talk, the constant posturing. I'd spent almost an hour schmoozing with guests, shaking hands with people whose names I'd forget by morning, and making polite conversation about absolutely nothing important. My cheeks actually hurt from forcing so many fake smiles. Thank goodness, Sirik had finally let me escape. My brother might claim to hate socializing as much as I did, but he was annoyingly good at it. Right now, he was probably charming the pants off the deputy mayor about some boring infrastructure upgrade for the PAC's main hall. At least one of us was good at this political networking stuff. I'd managed to grab a few bacon-wrapped scallops from the appetizer table before making my escape to the pool area. The food was actually decent, which was more than I could say for most of these fancy events. The pool area was beautifully lit with underwater lights that made the water glow like liquid sapphires. A few other guests had wandered out here too, but most of them were keeping their distance. Word had probably spread that I was Alpha Sirik's mystery woman for the evening. They all thought I was his girlfriend. future Mrs. Famir, as I'd overheard one particularly gossipy she-wolf whisper earlier. If only they knew the truth. Sirik was my brother. But we'd agreed to keep that detail private for now. It was easier this way, less complicated than explaining the whole family situation. A couple of brave souls had tried to strike up conversations with me, clearly hoping that getting cozy with the future Luna would benefit them somehow. I'd politely deflected their attempts, but they kept hovering nearby like vultures waiting for their chance. I was just starting to relax when I heard the sharp click of high heels on the stone patio. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. That particular sound of barely controlled fury was unmistakable. "What are you doing here?" Thessaly's voice cut through the peaceful night air like a rusty knife. I turned slowly, taking my time, and found her standing there in that ridiculous red dress. Even in the low lighting, I could see the rage practically radiating off her in waves. I tilted my head slightly, keeping my expression neutral. "I am admiring the night view," I said calmly. "Is there a problem with that, Miss Ashmore?" Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and I could see her jaw working like she was grinding her teeth. "That is not what I meant," she snapped. "What are you doing at this party?" "At the Missation Pack Ball." I raised an eyebrow. "I was invited." "Bullshit." She stepped closer, her voice getting louder. "You are stalking Calden, aren't you? You knew he'd be here, so you snuck into someone else's party. What are you trying to pull?" I almost laughed. The woman's paranoia was reaching new heights. "I can assure you, Thessaly, that Calden's presence here has absolutely nothing to do with mine. Don't lie to me." She pointed her finger right at my face, close enough that I could smell her desperation-scented perfume. "You want to get back together with him, don't you? That is what this is all about." Now I did frown. Her finger was practically touching my nose, and I didn't appreciate the aggressive gesture. Before I could respond, she stepped even closer and actually spat at me. Literally spat, while screaming about how I'd hooked up with another rich dude and how Calden would never take me back. "And I'll make sure Alpha Sirik sees your true colors," she finished, her face red with fury. I calmly wiped the spittle from my cheek with the back of my hand, my disgust clear. "Are you done blabbering?" I asked, shooting her a sideways glance full of disdain. She crossed her arms over her chest and jutted her chin up defiantly, clearly expecting me to back down or get defensive. Poor thing had no idea who she was dealing with. I took a sip of my champagne, letting the silence stretch until the few guests who'd been watching started to lean in closer. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm and cold as winter. "You know what, Thessaly? I don't care about Calden anymore. You can have him." I paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "After all, one man's treasure is another man's trash. You may see him as a treasure, whereas for me, I let my voice trail off meaningfully." Her face went from red to purple. "Are you calling Calden trash?" I grinned, taking another leisurely sip of my wine. "I never called Calden trash. That was you, sweetheart." The look of confusion on her face was priceless. I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out what had just happened. Honestly, I couldn't believe I'd let this woman get the better of me for 3 whole years. Love really messed with my brain and made me stupid. I'd been so blinded by my feelings for Calden that I'd let his jealous side piece walk all over me, undermining my confidence and making me doubt myself at every turn. But that was the old me. The new me had been tempered by heartbreak and came out stronger. I wasn't the same naive girl who'd bent over backwards trying to please everyone. Thessaly's confusion quickly turned back to rage. Before I knew what was happening, she'd knocked the champagne glass right out of my hand. The crystal shattered on the stone patio, and wine splashed across my emerald dress, staining the expensive fabric. I looked down at the damage, then back up at her with genuine annoyance. The dress wasn't crazy expensive, it didn't cost me an arm and a leg, but it was designer and definitely not cheap. More importantly, it was one of my favorites. Everything you have is all Calden's money anyway, she shrieked. I was about to respond when I saw something shift in her expression. Her eyes went wide as she just had a brilliant idea. And that is when I knew I was in trouble. Before I could react, she grabbed my arm and yanked me toward her. Help! Someone help me! She screamed at the top of her lungs. Don't hurt me! What the hell was she doing? The guests who'd been watching our little drama from a distance started rushing over, drawn by her screams. I could see confusion and concern on their faces as they tried to figure out what was happening. Thessaly, what are you? I started to say, but she cut me off. Please don't hurt me, she wailed, making her voice sound terrified and desperate. I am sorry, I didn't mean to upset you.